Tuesday marked the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. To mark the moment, a carefully choreographed display of solidarity with Ukraine was held on Tuesday, with EU leaders visiting Kyiv. They were meant to bring with them not just rhetorical, but substantial support. However, back-to-back vetoes by Hungary on the eve of the anniversary meant that Ursula von der Leyen and co. went to Kyiv basically empty-handed, without the vital €90 billion loan for Ukraine that EU leaders, including Hungary's Viktor Orbán, had agreed to back in December, and without a new package of Russian sanctions. Hungary's U-turn and double veto, which prompted an angry reaction from fellow EU members, comes amid a heated feud with Ukraine over Russian oil supplies, and sits against the backdrop of Hungary's upcoming election, at which Viktor Orbán is fighting for his political survival. So in this video, we're going to explain the escalating Hungary-Ukraine feud, Orbán's U-turn and vetoes, and what might happen next. Gone are the days of elite, carefully groomed Kremlin operatives working under diplomatic cover. In this edition of Too Long, we explore how Russia's war in Ukraine shattered its traditional spy networks, and how Moscow is now turning to teenagers, small-time criminals, and online recruits to wage a quieter war across Europe. That's just one of 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. As you'll probably already know, Hungary, or rather Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, has long been a thorn in the EU's side, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. Over the past 4 years, he's regularly been responsible for blocking, delaying and watering down packages of support for Ukraine in sanctions against Russia, usually relenting in exchange for concessions. While other EU leaders turned away from Putin, Orbán remained one of few to maintain a close personal relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Similarly, while other EU members worked to reduce their dependence on Russian fossil fuels, Hungary, thanks to exemptions granted to it and a couple of other countries, has not only maintained but deepened its reliance on Russian oil. According to a report by the Centre for the Study of Democracy, Russian crude accounted for more than 92% of Hungary's oil imports by 2025, up from 61% before the invasion of Ukraine. Together, Hungary and Slovakia, whose Prime Minister Robert Fico has also maintained relations with Vladimir Putin, are the only two EU countries that still import Russian oil, utilising carve-outs that were meant to give them more time to wean themselves off it, while insisting that it's indispensable to their economies. Russian oil has been flowing into Hungary and Slovakia via the Druzhba, or Friendship Pipeline, which transits Belarus and Ukraine before entering Hungary and Slovakia. We'll come back to this later. Anyway, Ukraine is, understandably, a bit strapped for cash after 4 years of fighting off Russia's invasion. The country's financial situation has been made worse by the fact that since Trump returned to office at the beginning of last year, there's been no new funding for US military assistance to Ukraine. Europe has sought to step up and fill the gap in order to help the Ukrainian government meet its military and financial needs, as the country faces a looming budgetary crisis from this coming April. In the face of this challenge, EU leaders spent a long time last year debating whether to use frozen Russian assets to help fund Ukraine. However, this plan was ultimately shelved in December, following pushback from a handful of national governments, particularly Belgium, as most of the frozen assets are held at the Brussels-based Euroclear Bank, raising Belgian fears that it could end up dragging into litigation over the plan. In the end, EU leaders agreed to supply Ukraine with an alternative loan of €90 billion, borrowed against the EU's shared budget. This was approved unanimously, with Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic agreeing to it on the basis that they would not be liable for repayment of the loan or interest costs. At this point, we need to divert our attention away from the loan for a moment and back to Russian oil and the Druzhba pipeline, which is at the centre of an angry dispute between Ukraine and its neighbours Hungary and Slovakia. Oil supply to Hungary and Slovakia via Druzhba have been cut off since January the 27th, with Ukraine saying a Russian drone strike hit pipeline infrastructure in western Ukraine and knocked it offline. The Hungarian and Slovakian governments, however, accuse Ukraine of failing to make repairs and intentionally keeping it inoperable. In response, Hungary's Orbán and Slovakia's Fico have ramped up countermeasures against Ukraine, Both said last week that they would halt diesel supplies to Ukraine, and Fico announced on Monday that Slovakia would stop emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine until the Druzhba pipeline was back up and running. These measures alone are significant, given that Ukraine faces a wintertime energy crunch amid widespread Russian strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Most dramatically though, Orbán said Hungary would veto both the EU's €90 billion loan for Ukraine and 20th package of Russian sanctions, which were set to be formally approved ahead of the invasion anniversary this week. He said, "I'm not in a position to support any decision whatsoever favourable to Ukraine until oil flows return to normality." The Hungarian vetoes come as the country rapidly approaches an election in April that could see an ascendant opposition end Orbán's nearly 16 years in power. Faced with potential defeat, Orbán and his Fidesz party have intensified their anti-Ukraine rhetoric during the campaign. He's accused Ukraine of basically blackmailing Hungary, while portraying his main rival, Peter Magyar, as a stooge of the EU and Ukraine. The veto sparked outrage among other EU leaders, not least because Orbán had agreed to the loan back in December after grueling negotiations. European Council President Antonio Costa suggested it was a violation of the principle of sincere cooperation between member states. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk described Hungary's actions as political sabotage. Germany's foreign minister said he was astounded, and Lithuania's foreign minister said he was really upset and frustrated. So, what now? Well, it's possible that the loan could be unlocked if Ukraine repairs the pipeline and oil flows to Hungary restart. Commission President von der Leyen asked Ukraine to accelerate its repairs for this reason. Ukraine says it's looking to repair it, but it's not so fast. Zelensky has suggested that repairing the pipeline is futile, as renovations may just be undone by further Russian attacks. Ukraine also quite clearly signalled its reluctance to dedicate resources on fixing the pipeline when, earlier this week, Ukrainian drones struck a Russian pumping station deep inside Russia that serves the Druzhba pipeline. So the future of the loan looks uncertain, although Ursula von der Leyen has insisted that the EU will deliver on the loan one way or the other, with various unspecified options that could be used. They might need to be creative. Otherwise, another option is to wait until the Hungarian elections in mid-April and hope that a new Hungarian government, if elected, will be more receptive and play less hardball. In the longer term, one imagines that Hungary's double veto and the frustration it caused at the EU level will add weight behind the calls for the EU to move away from unanimity voting, or if Orbán is re-elected, further the calls for Hungary's council voting rights to be restricted. As we mentioned earlier, the latest edition of our magazine Too Long is out very soon. And if you subscribe using code SPRING26, then you'll get your first copy for as little as £4.99, as well as 20% off every future issue as long as you stay subscribed. The latest issue features our ranking of the world's 25 most influential people, using ratings from you, our audience, as well as from our journalists. Inside, we not only reveal the full ranking, but the stories of a number of people who made the list, from the return of Donald Trump and the calculated moves of Xi Jinping to the AI frontiers of Sam Altman. We look at the new entries, New York's first Muslim mayor Zoran Mamdani, the radical shift of Pope Leo XIV, and bastion of technocracy Mark Carney, as well as the shadows that still linger, like Jeffrey Epstein. Across 72 pages, this issue of Too Long features a whole lot more than just that. We also have a cover story on how the UK became more divided than ever, and how a broken country could rebuild, the fragmentation emerging within the EU, how religion is being hijacked by politicians, as well as much, much more. You can pre-order your copy at toolong.news, and remember to use code SPRING26 for the best ever price.